coming away. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to today's first Ask Me Anything session with Sunlight. I am Sunny and this is Johna, and we'll introduce ourselves in just a minute, but this is our first Ask Us Anything event. So what we mean by that is we will be answering your questions. We don't have a strict outline about the topic, so whatever you want to know, whether it be about sunlight or homeschooling or any questions like that, we would love to answer for you. So Johna, let's start by introducing ourselves because there may be people watching who don't know who we are. So
my name is Johna. Sorry. I'm the tech person, so I've got videos going here and here, making sure you guys are watching what we're watching, and I had to mute myself. So, hi, I'm Johna. What did you ask me to say again?
So yeah, tell everybody who you are, what you do for Sunlight, how you discovered Sunlight, why are you here today, besides just to help me run the back end tech support.
I'm Sunny support now. My name is Johna Lawrence. I have 4 children, and I have used Sunlight since my oldest was going into kindergarten. He was 4 years old. We bought our first package. My friend that lived at the end of the drive said, I went to her because she homeschooled, and I said, how do you homeschool? She said, here's a catalog. It was Sunlight's catalog. She says, order K. And that's what I did. That is how I got started. I now have graduated my children. I'm a veteran homeschooler, and I work full-time for Sunlight in their community, in marketing and in product development. And you see me on convention floors as a Sunlight curriculum advisor. So I do a lot of things for Sunlight because I believe that much into Sunlight.
Well, thank you so much for being here. If you don't mind checking real quick, make sure we are out there on Facebook too. This is our first time for those of you watching where we've streamed in our Sunlight Connections app as well as on Facebook. I'm not seeing it, so I just want to make sure that we're in both places. For those of you who have not seen me before or met me, my name is Sunny. I'm Sunlight's community and social media manager. So I am in the Sunlight Connections community, checking in with all of you to see what are you talking about? What are you asking? Where do you need help to make sure that we are running events that are actually useful and helpful to you? So if there is ever anything that you want to hear about or you want us to talk about, make sure you post that, because I am regularly looking through that to see what topics are front and center in your mind and what's important to you. A little history about how I came to Sunlight. My parents homeschooled me for 1 year in middle school. They I think that I was following the crowd a little too much, and they wanted me to realize who I was and stand on my own 2 feet a little better. And they chose Sunlight because I always loved history and I was a bookworm basically since I learned how to read. And then I went back to school, never thought I would homeschool my own children until my daughter was preschool aged. And I thought, well, you know what? I can teach her numbers, letters, colors, basic preschooly things. And I just felt like she was young enough. I wanted to spend that time with her. So went to Sunlight with the intention of, again, only homeschooling for a year or 2, like my parents did with me, but we fell in love with it. My daughter learned how to read, and we kept going. So now that daughter's a freshman in high school, and we're going all the way through graduation. I've since added another child. He was born 5 years later, and we love it. So for me, I tell people Sunlight has changed my life in the best way possible because we've been able to share those experiences together as a family. So as I was having Johna help me out here, I mentioned the Sunlight Connections community. If you are not already part of the Sunlight Connections community, even if you are just curious about Sunlight, we highly recommend that you get in our community groups and ask the questions you need, get advice from other Sunlight families who are in there. We have a group both on Facebook, that's Sunlight Connections, and we have our own Sunlight Connections app. So if you prefer to be off social media, also in the app, we do more live events and things like that that might be useful and helpful to you. So make sure that you get involved, get plugged in, because then you can ask us anything all the time. So go ahead, if you're watching, drop your questions into the chat and the comments, and John and I will try to get to each of those as well. But we do have some questions that were brought to our attention in this week leading up to today. So we'll start with those and then kind of launch out from there. So let's start with Stacy's question, which I think is a great question about homeschooling and mom life in general. We know we have homeschool dads as well, but if you're the parent that's doing the primary teaching, it can be hard to fit everything in. So what Stacy said is, how do you do it all without help? By all, I mean teaching your child, cooking, cleaning, laundry, dishes, taking your child to dance or other activities. She said she grocery shops during dance, so that's covered. But there's other household chores and still having time to eat, sleep, and breathe. She said her husband works a lot and has to go to bed early, so she doesn't have as much help from him as I think she would like, or not a lot of outside resources there. So how do you fit it all in? One of the other moms in our Sunlight Connections group referred to it as having your Supermom cape. So how do you do it all? Johna, why don't you start?
Oh, well, I was going to say you don't. Let's just start with that. You do not do it all because we are not super beings. God has created us to be parents. A lot of us are moms, and so we have that inherent way to multitask, like you doing the grocery shopping while you are at dance, and you're probably also wrangling some toddlers in there or young kids or older brothers. But you just have to learn to prioritize is really what you just need to. I'm not saying you need to learn to prioritize, but that is the key: is what is the big rocks that need to be done for the day, and let the little rocks fall in place. And you will start finding when you put God first and the big rocks of the day come in after, the little things start falling in and they happen. And I can tell you, my laundry did not get caught up until I think my youngest was a freshman in high school. I'm sorry, it's a reality of life. There's always laundry to be done, always, and there's probably always some dishes somewhere in the house that have not made their way to the kitchen. So, Sunny?
Yeah. I love what you're saying about prioritizing, because that's a huge piece when you're homeschooling anyway, right? You have taken on a whole other job that a lot of parents don't have. So how do you do it all? And I know for me, that's something where I've had to look at different periods in my life, what priorities took place. You mentioned that you're a dance mom. I'm a former dance team mom myself, and I know that is a huge, when you are driving all the time, that is taking you away from home. So yes, trying to multitask like what you're doing. Something I still do because I do not enjoy grocery shopping is I go online to whatever grocery store I'm going to, and I have them add everything, to the cart, so that all I have to do is swing by and pick it up. Or sometimes, I'll send that to my husband and he'll swing by and pick it up. That way I'm not wasting time in the store going around and finding everything. So that's something I do with groceries specifically. When it comes to dishes and household chores, I start teaching my kids as soon as possible how to help me with those things. At this point, my kids are 14 and 9, and they're not going to do the same job I would when it comes to household chores, but they can at least pick things up and make it look okay. So yes, it may not be my standard. I'm very much a perfectionist and I'm very much a neat freak. But at this stage in life, if I can get help from the family members who, let's face it, they're contributing to the mess. So if they can help clean it up, I want their involvement with that. That's something I'm going to do. So I just start when they're young with what can they handle. And I have them come alongside me if I'm doing dishes, if I'm doing laundry. What, you want to come watch mommy do this? You want to come help mommy do this? Ooh, why don't you try this? And then once they've done it with my supervision, okay, let's see if you can do it on your own now. And I'll come back and look at, 30 minutes, an hour from now, no matter what it is. So yeah, just start with what they can handle and kind of have them help you with that. So that's what I do with the chores, with meal prepping, easy meals, whatever you can do there. Maybe order kits or, do like a big meal prep day where you create freezer meals, things like that to make it easy. Something that we do in our house is my husband has 2 nights a week that he does dinner. I have 2 nights a week that I do dinner. The kids just recently said, hey, if we do dinner 1 night a week, will you guys do all the cleanup? And because whoever cooks doesn't clean in our house, the other person cleans up after dinner. So we've kind of played around with that, but then it kind of makes it flexible and easy. If your kids are still young, that's going to be hard, but kind of roll with it and see what happens over time. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Johna, before we moved on?
I was gonna say, everyone, I saw somebody's comment about the cape. Everyone needs a super cape. Let's just, I think we should get it in our sunlight boxes. Add a little.
Yeah, oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, a sunlight super mom or super parent.
Yeah. But I think it's important to remember that there is no such thing too. So if you're trying to stick to that, or it seems that everyone you know has it all together, there are days that they feel like their whole world is falling apart too. So just remember that. We're all here with you, Stacey.
We are. And I mean, and I have several of the people I've talked to in the last few days, it seems like we have all said the same thing, and they're veteran moms or probably farther along in their homeschooling journey. They have just said there are days you just are, I don't know if I can do this. And then there's the next day, God seems to be right there going ahead of you, clearing that path, but you're not alone. And that's part of what our community is about. So get on the community and say, I'm having one of those days. I need my cape and it's nowhere around. And we can just pray for you that you're going to have one of those super days that come along, but they're just days. I can tell you there are going to be days that you're done at 10 o'clock in the morning and you've done every subject and it was perfect. And it was like, oh, why cannot every day be like this? And, you know, dinner comes out perfect and you hold on to those for the other days. So that's the best I can.
You brought up a great point too, that if you post in the community, we will pray for you and offer practical tips. So I've seen the meal planning posts in there, chore charts, you know, all of the schedule things, how to do it when you don't have a lot of help. When you do have help, what do you lean on? I know for me, I am very type A, uptight. I've got it all together. That's just kind of my personality. So no one just randomly offers me help because they think I've got it all together. So I've learned when I do need help to ask for it. So whether that be my husband, my kids, my mom, you know, my friends, whoever in my life can offer some level of help, make sure you're asking for it. Because if you look very pulled together, sometimes people think you've got it all together. Laura asks a similar question: what to do when your nerves are just fried, whether you're sick or just dealing with a lot? How do you prioritize then, Johna, if you just are not on your A game, you're not feeling up to it, and times are tough?
So really on days that I really couldn't get up, I mean, like it was one of those bad days. You know, when mom's sick, the whole world comes to an end. Or if you're just, it's not that day, I usually trying to really think, honestly, tell you what I did besides just bail, because I didn't bail. I just picked the easier subjects to get done. And I didn't worry about doing, you know, I didn't do a science experiment. I may not battle the math that day with the one that didn't want to do math. But the subjects that they all liked, I made sure we did it. I often might pull a historic movie or something when everything was done, because I didn't want to do a read aloud because I just wasn't up for it. That might go on the TV for them. I tried to keep it academic, but I made it an easier day for me just because we were making progress. We still did something to go forward. Even if it wasn't a full day, it was momentum. It was not lost. I just kept it going forward as best I could. Now, if I was sick, I would beg my husband to stay at home and take care of the kids. And you know how that goes. So they got a vacation day. So I always, I love to tell the story when when the fourth one was born, I worked ahead. I made out the schedules for my husband. And I said, for a week, he stayed home from school work. He was going to do school for the week because the youngest one was born in January. And we just gotten back into the routine and things were going forward. And I didn't want to lose that momentum. So I asked him, if I do all the schedule, will you do work? It lasted 20, maybe 40 minutes. And all the kids came and told me while I was in bed with the baby, we have a week off from school. Dad said we get a whole week off. And we redid it. I mean, and that's fine. Guess what? We still finished school for the year. They still learned. It wasn't a failure of a year. We did lots of fun things in that week, even with the baby and me recovering, and we're okay. They they did not suffer because they got an extra week off in January.
Well, and that's a great point too. Sometimes, like with a baby, that it's coming. So when you're still feeling good, which again with pregnancy, that you may or may not be, if you're able to do extra so that you can feel more relaxed about taking that time off. But I love what you said there, Johna, that in the end, it worked out, right? That it didn't ruin their school year. Taking a week off when you need to, sometimes that's what you have to do. I know there are days where I am just so bone tired that if I'm trying to teach anything, I can't even string a sentence together at the end of the day. Now, I am a working mom, so I teach at night. So this does impact me a lot more on weekdays. So what I do is on the weekends, if I'm feeling good and we have nothing planned, that's when we're going to knock out as much school as we can. But even during the week, like what Johna said, do what you can. So if that means I'm going to do one book, or I'm going to listen to my child read their reader, or I'm going to grade the last 3 days worth of math because I haven't been doing that to make sure you're on the right track. I'm just going to do what I can. If you're dealing with a lot, prioritize that health. As your sickness oftentimes comes because you're running yourself ragged and your body is telling you, I need to slow down. If you were working a job for someone else, you would take a sick day and you would rest. Sometimes we forget as moms that, we feel like we never can rest because, somebody needs to be fed, somebody needs a diaper change, somebody needs that, whatever it may be. But just remember, you have sick days at your job. Your job as a mom or a homeschool mom does not, negate that. You can still take a sick day if you need to. If your child is sick, same thing. I have a tendency to see, or do they feel up to listening to a story? Do I feel up to reading this story? Like what Johna said, whatever you can do it. But if you can't do anything, don't feel guilty about that. You have the entire year to get school done. And you, as the homeschool parent, get to determine what the standard is. So if you've had a really bad year, maybe a long health crisis or a death in the family, that's fine too. Things happen, and sometimes you have to plan around life, and that's okay.
So Emily over in our app is asking, if you do that because of illness, how do you regain the subjects? Just like you're talking about, once people are starting to feel better. And you might have to just do it slow, regaining all those subjects and build it back. Just think of it as that boulder. You're going to roll a little bit at a time, and once it gets going, it goes faster. But I think you'll be fine, Emily. Illness is not an easy thing to come over. I always think about in the old days, they had a cold. They went to bed for 6 weeks. I don't know any of us that can go to bed for 6 weeks because we have a common cold. But I'm thinking if they could do 6 weeks off, I can do a few days off and we'll be okay.
Yeah. And if it takes you a couple of weeks to get back on track, that's fine too. I know for me, when I first started homeschooling with Sunlight, if I had a really good Monday through Wednesday, for example, and then we were sick on Thursday, Friday, I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to ruin the whole next week if I can't start on Monday. Well, I have since realized and learned I'm just going to pick up where I left off. If I can do a whole, whatever that Thursday was on Monday, cool. If I can't, I'm going to do what I can and gradually build up to it. But you're really not behind because there's 52 weeks in a year, 36 in a Sunlight Instructor's Guide. So if you start if you end your year a week later than you thought you were going to, it might be frustrating if you're like, oh, I really wanted to be done. But in the end, it really does not matter as far as like their academic performance and preparation for life and all of that. So yeah, just do what you can do. And like I said, I do school on the weekends. So don't feel like you're locked into Monday through Friday. If, Thursday, Friday, people were sick, but by Saturday afternoon, they're feeling better, make up stuff on the weekend. I mean, I literally, if I have a good hour, I don't care what day it is. I don't care what time it is. If I'm in a good mood, the kids are in a good mood. I just grab my IG and say, oh, what can we squeeze in right here? So, you could absolutely do that. You don't have to limit yourself to specific days of the week or schedule. And if you do have dad at home, loop him in where you can as well, whether it be science experiments, reading to the kids, helping them with something, anything. My husband loves to help with math just because that's a subject that he enjoys. So whatever, support and resources you have, that can be helpful as well. So we also have a question from Bia. She asked, how do you figure out if your child might be dyslexic? So we'll jump into that. We did get some advice from one of our other Sunlight mentors, Sheila. You may know her from the Sunlight Connections app as well, because a couple of her children are dyslexic. And so she gave us information on that. I suspected that my son might be dyslexic at one point, but we found out he had another issue. But before I dive into that, Johna, do you want to comment on some stuff first?
I know what Sheila, our mentor, had said, and the first thing she had talked about was Amy Lykosh and Dr. Karen Halinga have a book called The Cure, and it's not a cure. It is a way to look through your child's vision issues and possible steps in order to find help to help your child. And to me, it is an excellent book. When I was a student back in the day, I love to say I was not thriving. Kindergarten through fifth grade, I probably was in the remedial readings, and the math I struggled with. And I was smart. I could read on my own, and I could add. You give me numbers, I could add them verbally, but writing them down, I couldn't do. So about fifth grade, I had a teacher came and called my mom. She says, I know what her problem is. And it was a vision issue. I wasn't dyslexic. I had a tracking issue with my eyes, but that book goes in detail about even my issue on a couple of chapters. And so had my teacher not found it, had I not gotten glasses at the time, that it was a great relief for my parents and for me to know I wasn't stupid. I was able to go forward and do the things. And in fact, that finally my they used to do IQ test. My IQ test and my ability in school finally matched. Up until then, though, they thought I was in all the remedial classes, and they were hoping I could function as an adult. Guess what? I can.
And you read our tech support, you write for Sunlight, you do all the different things. Obviously, you taught with Sunlight.
I went to college. It was great.
Yeah.
I taught, paid to be taught, not just taught my kids. So.
Well, and I love what you're saying there too about one of the advantages to Sunlight is you don't get or homeschooling is that you don't get those labels that you get in a classroom. Like you said, where teachers thought maybe it was a learning issue or something crazy, and it ended up being an eye issue. And this is actually the same with my son. He was writing letters and numbers backwards. I would teach him what letters sounded like on Monday, and on Tuesday he had no recollection of any of it. And I was very, very concerned because my daughter, his older sister, learned to read early, read well. It was never a struggle for her. But it was
the older siblings.
Right, the older siblings setting that precedent, right, that it's going to be easy. But when we took him to the eye doctor, it turns out that he's incredibly farsighted, and his eyes have different focal ranges, which is very rare in kids. That's something that as we age, typically our eyes become more farsighted. So really, when most kids can read with a page up here, he had one eye that focused about out there, and then one that was very far away from him. And so he was forgetting letter sounds because he really couldn't distinguish between those similar letters like A and C.
It was a nice blur out there for him.
Yeah, because he just couldn't really see them. So once we got him reading glasses, it was shocking the difference there. So, Bia, I would encourage you to evaluate a bunch of different options. It may not be dyslexia. However, Sheila did give us some good websites as well for evaluating that. And we'll drop that in the comments at the end of the the recording of this event, so that you can go straight to that site and check it out. She said her son did have some of those dyslexia symptoms, but not all of them. Also, there's Orton Gillingham products like All About Spelling that can be helpful for students who really struggle with this. Plus, there's dyslexia, there's dysgraphia, dyscalculia. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but there's a bunch of different things that all relate to how your eyes see and then what they can read and write. So we will make sure that those links are in there as well, so you can look at that.
One thing I put in there, we hadn't talked about, the spell you see that we carry is written by Dr. Karen Halinga, who she designed it for children who are dealing with, some learning disabilities, because you don't learn spelling like our traditional way of spelling. You learn to chunk letter combinations and stuff. And I think it's a great program because you practice good writing. They gave you paragraphs to copy. You are putting your spelling words into a paragraph as opposed to a list, and you're not memorizing all the at words or all the am words or all the, whatever the spelling is. You're learning great writing at the same time as learning your spelling and the rules without formally learning. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there are resources out there. Like I said, we'll put them in the replay. Also, Sheila is a great resource if you have dyslexic kids, if you're wondering about that, because she educated hers with Sunlight all the way. So there are options and ways to flex that even if they struggle to read themselves. We do have a question in the app. John, I apologize. I'm not seeing them on Facebook. So if you can monitor that, I'm going to look at the app because we do have a question about if it's okay if the couch subjects. So for those of you unfamiliar with Sunlight, those are the ones that you do on a couch or a comfy chair, like reading together. If they end up a couple of weeks ahead of the table subjects. So the table subjects are going to be the things like math, handwriting, any sort of writing that your student is doing at a table. What do you think about that, Johna?
Oh, I believe that it is okay if your couch subjects get ahead of your table subjects. Yes, it's ideal to keep all of your subjects on the same schedule, but if you get a read aloud ahead or any of those things that are couch where you're cuddling and especially if you're not feeling good, because it came from Emily, who asked us about being ill. Those are great ways to keep the progress going without worrying about handwriting or did they take a math test or doing a science experiment. You're making progress. So yes, if you want to read an entire book because that's a good time for this week, read the book. So, and you can get a lot done sitting on that couch.
I agree. I was going to say, too, something else that can be helpful if you do have a child maybe that's feeling great and you're feeling sick or some other kids are not, lap desks or clipboards are great, or letting the child sit on the floor at a coffee table while everybody else is on the couch. These are all things that I've done after my son was born and I needed to be on the couch. My daughter would sit there on the floor in the living room with her lap desk. We like clipboards for the car. There's some options like that if you do want to try to get those table subjects in. I would caution you on a child that is building a skill to let too much time lapse. So that would be your early elementary kids that are learning to read, they're learning basic math, they're learning how to write, only because those skills kind of build on each other. And so if you go too long between them, they might forget what they've learned and it's kind of like starting over, as opposed to a subject that you're reading to them, like a history. You can learn history at any time, science minus the experiments, those types of things. But yeah, you absolutely do not have to be on the same week in all your subjects at the same time. I personally like to try to stay on that just because I have kids with a big age gap. And so I don't want one child finishing their year months before the other child does. But yeah, if you've got kids close in age or if they're, kind of all on the same page, then I don't see any issue with it. And several of our Sunlight mentors like to get in all different weeks and all different subjects. John, I know you did a little more of that than I like to do. But does it work out at the end of the year?
Yeah, it works. Sorry, I'm still looking at Facebook trying to make sure I know it. Oh, well. Our app people are on and I love it. So that's our community.
Yes. So yeah, great community in there. And yeah, keep asking those questions. I do have more though that were asked ahead. So Grace asks about tips for a newly diagnosed ADHD child and parent. So it sounds like both of them are recently diagnosed with ADHD. Any thoughts or suggestions on that?
One, I would tell you, my mom will tell you I am ADHD, never diagnosed. So it's a struggle. So even schooling my kids, I think it's just good to chunk times and keep I think the best thing for me was, what was my goal? Find 3 things I got to get done for the day, get those done. Okay, now I can do 3 more things and break it apart. Don't try to sit there and marathon it out, because even though I'm ADHD, I love to make lists and I want to check them off, and then I will rabbit trail. So do 1, 2. Okay, we're going to go and take 20 minutes and run around and go do something, pick up the house, pick up your bedroom, something, come back, do it again. And I think doing that kind of stuff with a set helps your brain refocus and stay engaged for your 20-minute segments at a time. And I wouldn't go beyond 20 minutes at first with your kid. 20 minutes is a good long time for any child under, I think, 80. So you can break a math set, a math lesson into 2. We're going to do the first half, then we're going to go do 5 jumping jacks, and we're going to come back and we're going to do the second half. If you're doing Matthew C, there's usually 10 or 20 questions. Do half. I think that would be, but it's a learning. You're teaching your child the same as you're teaching yourself at the same time, how to have to handle it hopefully without being medicated, or if you are medicated, how you can be on the lowest end of that dosage, because a lot of it is learning the coping of dealing with it. I think I'm not proof. I'm just a struggler.
But that's a good point. Yeah, we always tell people to try different things. If it doesn't work, try something else, and probably even more so in this case, Grace. If the child is struggling with the hyperactivity piece and wanting to move, things like those giant exercise balls to let a kid sit on and bounce while they're working, or letting them stand at a counter to work, that's enough physical engagement sometimes that it can make it easier to focus. But you might have to check in with that student to make sure they're really paying attention. Same thing for you as the parent, John. I love what you said about pick 3 things to do. Those are your goals. And if you get them done, then add on more, as opposed to a 20-item to-do list, which is going to be overwhelming and all of that. And again, like I said earlier, really focus on prioritizing your health. So what do you need to do to manage things? I know for me, if I'm not sleeping well, I struggle with focus. And so I have to make sure that I'm allowing time for sleep, which is hard because I'm a night owl. I don't want to go to bed, but I know I have to get up early for various things the next day. So that's kind of a discipline thing, but I also function better when I'm well rested. So looking at that, and whatever dietary changes are better for you and your child. I know I really do try to limit processed foods with my kids, even without any diagnoses, just because they seem to do better when they eat less processed food. So yeah, it's going to be an experimental process, I think, because obviously everybody is different. But I think those are some options. Let your kids move around, let yourself move around, but kind of hone in on what your goals are for the day. Go ahead, Johna.
No, sorry, I thought you were done. Sorry.
I could talk all day, so no. If you need to cut me off, go for it.
Well, one, I was going to encourage the mom's Grace, right?
Yes.
I was going to encourage you, Grace, document what you're doing. So you're here in September, document, you just have your diagnosis for both of you. What is your game plan? And then document what works and what doesn't work. And then when you figure out what's working, you need to contact me so you can tell me how to make that work. And then we'll even talk even deeper, but that you're working on something that a lot of us battle. And so you're not alone, but you are somewhere, I don't have a child that I'm dealing with at this time, but like Sunny said, we dropped a lot of our sugars, a lot of processed food, and watch for hidden dyes in food. Dyes actually are a friend of mine when I used to work full-time long time ago. His daughter was ADHD, and they totally removed anything with any dyes of any kind out of her diet, as well as all processed sugars. And he said it was a 180 change in their child. So I'm not trying to medicate your child. I'm just saying all of us, I think, as America, could get rid of the processed sugar and we could get rid of the processed dyes, and we'd probably be all healthier. And I say that as I would like to have a Coke and drink it, but I don't. Look, I have water.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I'm a little crunchy myself, so yeah, I'm always looking for how do I research, new things. And yeah, it's definitely, it can be scary, but I have to say, in talking to parents who have pulled their kids from school because they were on various IEPs that were not working with homeschooling, you really do have that option to customize the education to the child and how they learn best, and get in the community and ask other parents in the same boat, because they're out there. We see these questions all the time, and you can see solutions that have worked for other people that might also work for you. And yeah, I love what you said, Johna. Grace, if you find something works, please share that with us, share it with the community, because it is a battle and a struggle that a lot of our families deal with. And we guarantee you that people will be helped by that. And there's also some options out there that other people have tried as well. Let's move on to, I'm not sure, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It's either Aylin or Island, maybe. She is doing the second grade curriculum with her son, and they are in language arts, where they had to do a journal entry as one of their written assignments. She said she's struggling with him quite a bit because he has so much trouble spelling words. How can she help? Can she spell everything out loud for him while he writes? I think it's a situation where she's not quite sure what she should be having him struggle through on his own versus what she should be doing for him. What are your thoughts with a second grader and their writing?
Oh, on a second grader, I scribe. I mean, at a second grade, they're still learning motor skills, and they can write, and your child can write, but you get 2 or 3 sentences in, and they're exhausted, and their hand hurts, and they can't express it. But be their scribe, and if you want to spell the word out loud to them, spell it out to them. If they're still writing, I think that's phenomenal. One of my kids would have milked it till they were in 10th grade for me to scribe if they could. They did not get that far, but they would prefer me to let me dictate what you want is that creative juices going, and you want them to be free with how they would write their journal. And if it unhinders them in their ability to write by letting you do the writing for them, then I would, because part of that process is not the physical writing. That process is getting that creativeness going, and some handwriting is getting them to write it for you. And so if you can, and the copy work, dictation, but you're not dictating at second grade, you're still doing copy work. So
well, and that's something important to remember too. Yeah, is that language arts is a variety of skills, right? You're learning to read, you're learning to write, you're learning to spell. Oftentimes those creative expression prompts, that is to get their creative juices thinking, get the thoughts out there and on paper. So Johna mentioned scribing. My younger child is in 4th grade, and I still scribe for him on some of those longer assignments because his brain goes so fast on the creative side that there's no way his hand can keep up at this age. I mean, even if you think about it, when I write now and I'm typing, I still talk out loud to myself as I'm writing things so that I don't lose my train of thought. And then drafts, right? Every writer has rough drafts that they do before they present a final paper. So yeah, I absolutely think you can spell the words for him. If he's writing in 2nd grade, that's amazing. A lot of kids just don't have the hand-eye coordination yet at that age to do that super well. So that's amazing. But also, feel free to let him make mistakes, and then you come back and correct them later, or scribe for him. To make that easier. Or I know Sheila and others, as we mentioned her earlier, Sunlight Mentor, she taught one of her children to type very early because handwriting was hard. I want to say he was in 2nd or 3rd grade and learning to type. So you don't have to wait if you find typing is easier for that child as well. So let's go ahead and answer Rachel's question. This is a great question about Sunlight in general. She said they just started with Sunlight. They're doing levels E and H specifically, but when she was doing a read aloud, she came across several passages that she felt were inappropriate. So she skipped over them and moved on. She understands this happens. It's a wonderful book otherwise. So she actually has a 3-part question. We'll break this down just so it's not overwhelming for you watching. But the first one is there a heads up for parents regarding books that may have passages, subject matters, conversations that might be deemed inappropriate for some families? Johna, how does Sunlight handle that?
So in our instructor guide, you will find notes for read alouds, usually in the back section 3. Is it 3 or 4? 3. Mm-hmm. That has all the notes for the book. So if you're looking in the front part and it has the week, you may not see the notes. You need to go back to section 3. Just that's one step. And we will have comments in there, heads up. There might be a word that is used in the 20s and 30s that was totally acceptable, that has changed over time and now is not used in the same terms as in the 20s and 30s, but you're reading a book that was written in that time. So don't shy away from explaining to your children how words can be misused or changed. I won't say misused because it's not that they're misused, but you can give a different word for the same thing. I know there's words that, my grandfather used in just being out on the farm that was totally normal, but now, I go forward to when I was in high school, I was like, you said what? What are you talking about? And to him, it's the way he grew up. He had to explain it to me. And then I realized, in this situation on a farm, that's appropriate. For me to use it going into Walmart, maybe not appropriate. So, but that's just something I expanded my vocabulary, and that's your kids are learning a way to expand their vocabulary with an understanding of a cultural change, and for you to be there. And that's what those notes are there for. So that's the biggest, is pre-read the notes, or just know, especially when it comes to vocabulary words, or when it says notes to mom and dad or notes to parents, that's your key, that there is something in this section that you might be heads up. We will give you heads up when there is a death of somebody that has caused a lot of trauma, that, hey, the main character dies, or, a dog dies, that this might cause your child some grief, that this is the time to be aware that it's coming. And you can say to your child as you're reading, I'm going to read you something and it's going to be sad. We're going to talk about it when we're done. And I love that Sunlight gives you those heads up, and they give us books that have these things in them, because my kids and we would have those conversations at the time, and I would just stop school. You don't try to gloss over it. Just, do you have any questions about what I just read? Let me tell you a couple things that I think I would have had questions about. If they say, no, I don't have any questions. And then have the discussions, about the dog dying and how it made them feel, or what happened, or, what historic event just happened that you read about.
Yes.
Did I derail us? I'm sorry.
No, I think that's perfect. And that's actually something at the beginning of the week. I don't do a huge amount of lesson planning personally, because the Sunlight Instructors Guides do such a good job of doing that for me. But if I see that little in the box, which is a parent note, I am going to look at that and see, what is it talking about? Even for my older child who's in high school, I want to know, because she does read a lot of the books on her own now at this age. What are we talking about? Is it death, loss? Is it suicide? Is it a sexual situation? As the kids get older, you're not going to introduce those topics in 3rd grade with a Sunlight book. But as the kids get older and they're reading things, I want to make sure that I'm aware of what's going on. It also opens the door to have those conversations that your kids may not bring to you necessarily, but these are topics they're hearing about from their friends. If they have any friends at all, they are hearing some things maybe from those friend groups. And so when you address it in a Sunlight book, it's super helpful at that time. I think I've always found it to be incredibly age appropriate to have those conversations with my child when they come up in Sunlight. Now, I will say that as a precaution, pay attention to the age range recommended for the level you're doing. If you are doing level F with kids that fall in that age range, but a 6-year-old sibling might be walking in and out of the room or listening, you're going to want to really pay attention to those types of things, because F is designed for those older, upper elementary, middle school age groups, or, any of the levels, whatever it is. So just because your child is a strong reader, do not push them ahead too soon, because you're going to be dealing with harder topics the older they get. But again, like I said, I've always found it to be relatively age appropriate. It's something that I do not ever want to have my head in the sand. I know my kids are learning things from their friends in the outside world as well, and I would rather be the one to have those hard conversations with them first. But like you mentioned, Johna, the thing about language and words that have changed over time, that's something that also for your kids, they may not understand it. They may not even know that it's something that might be considered a bad word now. So in the early years, I just read it and see if they react to it. I mean, that's kind of how I've always handled that. And then as they get a little bit older, I'm like, okay, do you know what that means? Do you understand what that means? And some people find it more comfortable to do an audiobook if it's going to have a lot of terminology that is uncomfortable for us to say. So there's a lot of options there, but remember, as the Sunlight parent, you have the right to decide what you want your kids to know, what you want to teach them. If you find a book to be too mature, you can drop it or substitute it or do whatever you want to do. So don't think that we are telling you you have to do every single book, because we know that families have differing levels of what they're comfortable with. We know children have differing sensitivity levels. That child may have experienced trauma that is going to make something hard for them that it won't for another child. So you know your kids best. Feel free and comfortable to flex that as you need to. But I kind of do Sunlight as it's written, and charge into those hard topics with my kids, because I know they're going to hear them eventually, and I would rather do it when they're in my home than when they're on their own trying to figure life out. But let's talk a little bit about the read alouds in there, because she asked, the second part of her question was, are read aloud books chosen as a read aloud rather than readers because they're more likely to need to be edited by the parent on the fly as they read aloud, excuse me.
Well, so I think this is a two-part, or there's two parts to that question. One, I don't think that Sunlight is expecting you to edit on the fly. We're expecting you to have those conversations. By all means, we're not asking you to try to skip over words and all the things. They do pick up the books because the books are, you wouldn't make them readers because they're not the kids' reading level yet. They're an older reading level. Or they are the history to include the discussions and those kind of things. They are not all going to be just their level books that you choose to read aloud. So no, I don't think that we are expecting you to edit on the fly. We are hoping that you're reading your notes in the instructor guide to give you heads up. And at that point, that is when you get to edit on the fly as a parent. You choose. Again, it's a guide that we give you as an instructor guide. We give it to you to make Sunlight work for the best that it's going to be for you, but you are the master of the school inside. So if you choose to skip over something, that's yours to decide and do. That's not ours to decide that, oh, I laugh in my head. I hear there is no homeschool police. There is no homeschool police. We are not going to come after you. You will find that there are some books that I think there are some books that I even kind of was like, I'm not going to say that word, and just kind of gave it another name. Or if they called him a name, my kids laugh. I call everybody George. If I don't know your name, I have, a bear goes across the road. Oh, look, there goes George. Everything's George. And so they knew that if there was an inappropriate word, or like they all called me, I'm like, George, they knew. What did it really say? I'm like, I don't want to get into that, but and we'd have the discussion, and I'd say, I don't feel comfortable saying that word anymore because, and I would give the lesson, and then I would substitute George. Or so if all of you want to say George, I love it. Tell me, send me a comment.
I'm going to start doing that now, using George for everything. And let's talk about the cultural literacy piece too, because she asked about getting into the high school years. Is it assumed there will be an inappropriate content in the higher level books? I saw an interesting thread on Facebook recently about A Brave New World, which many of us remember from our own high school years. Let's talk about that just briefly. Why does Sunlight include books like that, or The Great Gatsby, or some of the other ones that?
Well, honestly, let's think about that. Would you rather your little Johnny or little Susie read it under your own home and have the conversation with you, or go to college and read it because a professor expects them to have already been exposed, and have the conversation with other college students who are just as baffled as they are. I think Sunlight does a great job of equipping us to have those conversations again, one on one with our kids, opening up dialogue. My kids, I say all the time, my kids and I have good conversations. My kids are not perfect. My kids and I have conflict. I'm just going to tell you that. But they can pick up the phone and call me still and say, "Did you see?" And we have those conversations. In college, I had girls that would say, "How do you get a guy to want to hold your hand?" I'm like, "Oh, that's where we're at. Great." They don't. You don't want to hold their hands until they ask you to marry. No, I just.
Yeah, but mine aren't to that age yet. But yeah, I know Sunlight does, it kind of breeds readers, and so I don't have time to read all the books that my kids read on their own, and so I do want them to feel comfortable knowing if they come across something in literature that they don't agree with or that seems a little sus, as the kids would say. My daughter is going to hate me for using that word, but
Oh wait, that's not even
yeah. That they can come and talk to me about it. So if you're teaching littles, you may not understand quite yet how important that is, but Johna has grown children. I have a high schooler now. I'm really seeing how glad I am that my kids feel comfortable in having hard conversations with me.
Now and I'm trying to remember the book that one of my girls read. And I mean, it's one of those that I've seen moms, and I wish I could it's my old brain, but it's one of those that moms have said recently in the last 2 years, why would we let our kids read this? But my older girl said, oh, they talked about, and I want to say it was some inappropriate relationships, maybe some harsh, abusive type relationship. And I said, well, yeah, that happens. And in that culture, that happens. And it's something that we combat here in the States, but it still happens that, someone down in the community, it's going to happen. That's why we want you to stay safe. That's why, when we say this, and so it bridged that conversation into this. And I was able to explain sometimes in detail what that meant, but that allowed my kids to be aware of some real life things going on. And they did not feel sheltered, but they felt protected because they didn't have to deal with it. They read about it in a book that may or may not have happened, but
absolutely, yeah. And like we said, you're the parent, you're in charge of your homeschool, so we would never want to push you to do something you're uncomfortable with. But I think, we've seen value in having those hard conversations while our kids are still at home, because once they're out of your house, you might have some control over what they do, but not a lot anymore. So now is the time to really help them solidify, what they believe, how they feel about things, all of that while they're still children. We do have a question from Angie saying, hey, ladies, my daughter 8 struggles with the spelling in level 3 language arts. Any tips? We've tried all about spelling, but it's just too much teacher time. So I want to use the Sunlight spelling if at all possible. So this actually I see is kind of a 2-part question, both the spelling answer that we will answer for you, Angie, but then also it's very teacher intensive when you're using Sunlight. Oftentimes it's teacher intensive because we don't give kids a lot of workbooks or put them in front of the computer. So what are your thoughts, Johna?
If I was struggling with, and I was wanting to only use the spelling words that are in the Sunlight, the tips that they have at the first week are usually good tips, but making those flashcards, having them drill, that was another thing. So my third child, she had a vision, like we talked about with Sunny's child, had some vision issues, but I used to do her spelling words on flashcards, and she would have to, she literally had to stand, but she would write out the flashcards, great practice, and I didn't have to do it. To while I was like doing something else, I could hold up a flashcard while I was helping math with somebody else, and she would read the flashcard. And some of those I would have to do, I would raise the flag, excuse me, like I would have the card and I would do this, and she had to read it. It just made her focus on learning that the other thing is that the All About Spelling is a wonderful spelling program, but it's very intensive. So you said you've tried it. My understanding, I never used it, but it is an intensive, teacher intensive program. Sunny, I don't know if you've used All About Spelling. I don't think you have
I
you?
haven't. No, and I generally speaking do not supplement a lot beyond what Sunlight tells you to, unless I see a problem. So, for example, a child with messy handwriting gets to do handwriting until they can prove to me that they write neatly, and then once they write neatly, I get rid of handwriting. I actually did use Spelling UC, so that's a different spelling approach. Briefly, I think I used it 1 or 2 years with my daughter, and that they go through and they color different letter chunks throughout the week, and then you do it kind of like a dictation at the end of the week. And so that was something that, with the exception of grading the colored chunks that she was doing during the week, I didn't find it super parent intensive like All About Spelling is. But if you're wanting to really just stick to the Sunlight Language Arts spelling, what I would recommend with that is maybe vary the writing surface too. I know my kids both had a lot of success with dry erase boards. So they might copy the list on paper on Monday, and then on Tuesday, they're writing it on the dry erase board. We both had one hanging on the wall, as well as a smaller one that you can put in your lap. I've heard that your brain connects what you're doing better if you write like you would on a board for whatever reason. So you might try that. And the way Sunlight does it is you write them big one day, small one day, maybe have her write them on index cards. I think back to, I think it's Language Arts 1 with the I Can Read It books in there and the word lists. Maybe convert it into like a word list and have her repeat those words. The next week, what I do is if the child missed it when we took the test on Friday, I wrote it on the next week's instructor's guide with that spelling list, and we just kept doing it until they could spell that word. So that might be an option, trying to write it in print and cursive, whatever you can do to really solidify that brain hand connection. Now, I have heard of some students that they learn how to spell the words on the spelling test, but then the rest of their spelling is atrocious because they can remember the spelling list, but then when they go to write, the rules of spelling have kind of slipped their grasp. So yeah, do you have any ideas with that, Johna?
Well, I was going to say that kiddo number 3 that I told you about with the cards, that she could take a spelling test and make 100. I mean, she has a great brain for remembering that, but 2 days later could not spell any of those words on the spelling test. So we pulled her back and did spell UC with her for a level or so, which I loved as a parent because they say set a timer. You set a timer and you do for a certain amount of time. She did not have trouble at the time doing all of the work because she was a little bit older than the level that we stuck her into. But let me tell you, it changed her spelling in a year, just being able to recognize it, that chunking. It helped her brain remember those chunks because she had learned, OU, not UO, and, those kind of combinations that she was practicing in her dictation and stuff. And that worked great for them. So
Yeah.
there's someone at the door.
Yeah, I was just saying, sorry, my dog's getting a little excited. But yeah, that's true. So Angie, if it's an issue of like the rules and remembering like OU or I before E, that type of stuff, yeah, spelling UC might be helpful. And I do think it is less parent intensive in that they work through the workbook and they're learning to spell in a paragraph as opposed to a word list. But if it's just the word list itself in the Sunlight IG, I would work on writing it on different surfaces, maybe doing like we do in the preschool program where there's like sandpaper letters that they trace and stuff. It just gives it a different texture that might help solidify that. We are running low on time, but I just saw a question come in. So I do want to hit this one too that says, what about typing the spelling words for kids who have trouble with physically writing the words or just for a change of pace on one of the days?
I think that's great. Sunny had talked about the dry erase board. that was a game changer for my kids. I have done spelling. We didn't do our spelling words on the driveway. I would have loved to have had a driveway that I could have written on. We had gravel when my kids were little, so it's hard to write on the driveway, but take chalk out and let them write it on the driveway. Have them be creative. Sand, rice, and a cookie sheet, even. If they can do that, that would be a great way to practice your words, especially when they're little. Emily, I don't know how old your kids are. Angie's, hers is 3rd grade. I'm having that tray is still a fun way to write your words. So, be creative. If they can spell it, I wouldn't worry about the writing as much. I mean, I think putting that hand and writing it does have a connection in your brain, and that is a key part of it. But if for some reason your kid can write it in their fingers or whatever, or get them to write it in the air, and see how that goes for them. I mean, that's less stress on you and them if they are writing it. We used to crack up. Mine would write it and they're like, oops, and they'd erase and do it again. If you haven't figured out, my kids they're about as animated as they can come. So, yes.
Well, and I just thought of something else when you said that I had forgotten about. For a long time, we had the alphabet magnets on our refrigerator too. And so that might be a fun way that doesn't feel like school, but have the kids write a story or a sentence or a message to you on the fridge with those letter magnets, because of that, they very quickly learn, like, yeah, even if things are misspelled, they start to learn those rules of spelling. And again, it's that you mentioned it with the writing. There's just something about connecting your brain and your hand in a way that helps with that versus just looking at a word. So yeah, hopefully one of those will work. We have now talked for an hour, Johna. Like I said, I can talk all day about anything. I know when we get
keep
together,
going.
we definitely can. So if you're tuned in and watching, thank you so much for being part of this. And if there's anything else that you want to ever hear Johna and I talk about, or any of the other Sunlight mentors or advisors talk about, we've got a whole team of us who have used Sunlight for years that love to share how amazing our Sunlight journeys have been and all the things we've learned along the way. We would love to talk about whatever you want to hear about. So definitely send us those questions. Get involved in the community if you're not already, because we are looking at that to determine what we're going to talk about next, which, speaking of next week, is Homeschool Helps and Hacks. So if you have not joined us for one of those, I want to invite you now to that. We do Homeschool Helps and Hacks the 3rd Thursday of every month during the school year. And we just provide different tips and tricks about various topics. The one coming up next week on the 21st is going to be all about flexible organization solutions. So if you feel like you are too messy and disorganized, or you can't stay on track with your schedule, or you're just not that uptight type A personality and it is hard to stay on track, we've got all sorts of options for you in that event. So join us for that next Thursday at 1:00 Mountain Time. We will be streaming that again in the Sunlight Connections app live. If you tuned in kind of late today or missed out on some of this, we will have a replay available as well. So you can always add questions later and we will respond to those as we see them. So Johna, thank you so much for being here with me today. And for those of you who tuned in, thanks for giving us questions so that we could talk without an outline today.
Send more questions. I would love to do this again.
Yeah, this is so much fun. And yeah, we're here for you. So tell us what you want to hear.